Identity is at the core of every great digital experience. Ping Identity's solutions support the scale, flexibility, and resiliency required by enterprise-level IT teams for lasting digital transformation. With 99.99% uptime and over 3 billion identities under management, they're the only identity vendor that's proven to champion the scale, performance, and security of large enterprises. That's why Ping Identity champions your unique identity needs. They give you the tools to offer your users the right access at the right times, no matter how they connect with you. Visit securityweekly.com/Ping Identity to learn more.
And we're here today with Toby Miller, who I'm told is the world's biggest Patriots fan. Hey, Toby, how's it going?
Not really. Go Steelers.
I'm kidding. On one of the prep call we had for this, Toby, you had a Pittsburgh Steelers sweatshirt on. Is that where you're from? Are you from? And you're rocking, and hopefully it may be a different one, maybe the same one. Is that where you're from?
Actually, underneath my Steeler hoodie or whatever you want to call this, I have a Zscaler shirt.
Yeah.
I'm actually from Maryland.
You're from Maryland. Gotcha.
So I'm rocking IT and Steelers.
There you go. Outstanding. What technologies did you tinker around with when you were growing up in Maryland?
Football.
Football.
I actually, to be honest with you, I really didn't become interested in I messed around with computers in high school a little bit, but I went into the Navy in 1990, started using their mainframes or mini frames, whatever you want to call it, back in about 92, 93. Got really into it, got out of the Navy, and did some aircraft carrier design for about a year. Didn't like it, and got into IT, and really haven't looked back since.
Yeah, IT in the 90s was pretty crazy.
It was.
A lot of Sun, Solaris, that kind of stuff.
You see, in the Navy, we didn't even have that. We just had Unisys machines.
Yeah, like mainframe kind of platforms, right?
Big time mainframe. Yep. And what was funny is we look inside. You look inside of a computer now, and the hard disk is if this big, whatever. And then, but back in the early 90s, I mean, our hard drive for the mainframe weighed like 10 pounds.
Yeah.
And it would scratch easily. It would break easily. You had to be very careful with how you handled the
you don't want
the disk.
You don't want to drop one of those because it's not working after that.
And they were this thick.
Yeah.
They weren't small.
Which is crazy to think, like, I just bought a 5 terabyte USB drive that I can throw in my bag to have for extra storage for like $90 on sale.
Wow. I was thinking the disk drive is probably the size was equivalent to what a tire is on a car.
Yeah. Probably weight about the same too.
No, not that heavy, but it was heavy, but not that heavy.
Yeah. Now, when you say you did IT, was it like IT administration kind of stuff?
Yes. So I got in security about 99, 2000. Started out doing firewall administration. I was living in the D.C. area. I actually did firewall administration for DLA, Defense Logistics Agency. And from there, just I was very, very, very interested in the whole detection, monitoring, all that good stuff. And
yeah, it's a similar journey, I think, to many of us that work in security today, right? We learned how to do the administration side and how to build things and keep things working before we got into the how do we do detection, how do we break things. It sounds like you had a pretty similar journey.
I did, but I loved the analytical part of detecting. I used to just use TCP dump or snort. Record network traffic and just analyze it, just because I could, and it was fun. I used to be able to read TCP packets and hacks. Don't ask me to do that anymore. But back in the day, I could. It was fun. Loved it. And
like you learned enough to, in a fun way, heckle Stephen Northcutt back in the day. Was that around that same time?
I did, and and actually he and I I got to know him through a conference that was happening in Dahlgren, Virginia. And I actually took the GIAC exam at his house when he was living in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And he asked me to co-author Network Intrusion Detection Signatures and Analysis.
Was it the first edition? Was it first or second? There was like 3 editions to that one.
I think it was the second. And I wrote either 2 or 3 chapters in it. I had a blast. Then I also helped write Maximum Security, and I think that was the second and third edition. I did. And then I had a book contract with O'Reilly at one point in time, but they wanted me to change the format to a cookbook, and I forgot exactly what I was supposed to write about. But I didn't like I couldn't.
I remember the cookbooks. There was a lot of cookbooks, and they're not about cooking for those listening, right? They were technology cookbooks.
Yes, and I just couldn't take what I wanted to do and put it into a cookbook format. So we agreed to disagree and parted ways.
Yeah, it's interesting back then, Toby. So much of the focus was on network security and looking at packets, and I mean that still exists today. But I have a very nostalgic view of spending more of my time looking at packets. Like you and I have very similar backgrounds. I think in the 3rd edition of Network Intrusion Signatures, I have 1 page that was like a packet dump that I gave to Judy Novak, and she credited me in the book. So we have very similar background.
Yeah, I still looking at packets nowadays is more for troubleshooting than as anything else.
Yeah.
I mean, if something goes down from a network perspective, the first thing I want to do is look at packets. And maybe it's old school, maybe I'm showing my age, but it's the best way to figure out whether something is working or not.
Well, it certainly told you where to look, perhaps, and find the machine that was compromised. And then I think the next logical step was to look and see what was on there in terms of the hacker tools and malware, right?
Exactly. Did you by any chance use TCP/IP Illustrated as the Bible?
Oh, I've read it twice back in the day. It's required.
I don't know. I don't know if I read it twice. It may have been 7 or 8 times, not straight through, but just
right, yes.
Seeing something. I used to carry it to work every day. It was it. I carried that more religiously than I did lunch. I wouldn't have gone home without it. As a matter of fact, I cleaned out my old house, and I think one of the few IT books I kept was that one.
Yeah, because it's still relevant. I still give it to my interns today. I'm like, even if you're not going to stare at packets as much as we did 20 years ago, you still have to understand how this stuff works to do whatever it is you're going to do. Software developer, doesn't matter. I think having that knowledge is so key.
Yeah, I used to love to read that book. That book was better than Moneyball. That book was better than any kind of any other book I've listened to or read since. I loved it.
Yeah, the author was Richard Stevens, who passed away not too long after he wrote the book. He was involved with SANS in the early days, and I remember Steven, I think, is the one that told me that he had passed away.
Yeah, I read. Maybe Steven was the one who told me way back in I knew he passed away in the 90s.
Yeah.
I don't know what from, but his book, I'll never give away that book.
Well, and certainly that was good reading to have. And you did some early work on passive OS fingerprinting. I think it's one of the ways I found you. I'm like, Toby's name looks really familiar. And I'm like, I think I read your papers back in the day on passive OS fingerprinting.
I enjoyed. Like I said, I enjoyed packet analysis. Being able, I was working as a contractor at a SOC. But me being able to look at the time, look at packets or a series of packets and figure out what operating system was, kind of gave me a leg up on everybody else, because everybody else, and it's still similar to this in today's world, everybody else is relying on the IDS to tell them everything. And at the time they were using Snort, and they would just look at the Snort rules. Well, as you know, and it still applies today, there are false positives. So my philosophy always in the day was, if you understand what's normal, picking out what's not normal is going to be easy. You can't just look at the rules or the results of what Snort spits out to you and just say, hey, this is fact. You've got to understand what's not normal. You got to understand, if you understand what it looks like normally, then picking the abnormal, picking the odd stuff will be easy.
Yep. Yeah, you got to know how things work. Absolutely. Yeah, and I remember Snort back in the day, because you'd see a Linux vulnerability or exploit, and you're like, wait, that triggered, but it was going to a Windows host. Back to your point of knowing how to look at the packets and go, what's the operating system? That used to happen a lot back then.
And just understanding, we'll just use Windows, understanding how Windows operates and understanding how Windows handles, that the three-way handshake versus maybe Linux, and maybe they handle it the same, but they may use their MSS may have been a little different, their window size may have been a little different, whatever. But based off that, all that little stuff, it just gave you, we talked about the Patriots and the Steelers at the beginning of this. I looked at that as I was being the Bill Belichick of where I was working, because everybody else relied on Snort. I knew more than what Snort was telling them, and I could walk in there and go, nope, you're wrong, or yes, you're right, and here's the reason why.
And you're right. A lot of it was troubleshooting too. I remember in those days, I would help various teams. I worked at a university troubleshoot stuff. Like, it wasn't secure. They're like, what's the security guy doing? Help us with this. I'm like, well, I can see all this stuff. I can help you troubleshoot that. Did you have similar experiences?
Oh, very much so. And as a matter of fact, a lot of people think security back in the day and even today, we are policy writers. All we are is roadblocks, and they don't see us as technical people. And in many ways, we are a jack of all trades and a master of many. And we have to be in order to understand. And actually, when I moved here to the Chicago area, one CIO looked at me and said, I'd hate to be in security. Why? Because you're responsible for everything and you own nothing. And, as far as knowledge goes, you had to take that approach. You had to know a little bit about everything in order to have a conversation with somebody in networking, somebody in storage, somebody in managed compute. So, we had to know a lot more than probably most people.
I think that's one thing that is a distinct quality of hackers that I've kind of observed over the years, is the hacker mindset. One of the things that I think plays into it is your ability to learn new things and learn something about a thing that you don't know anything about, and do that quickly. Do you think that's true? That's a true quality of what we would term as a hacker?
Yes. And also, I think a hacker is somebody who's always questioning, always questioning something, always interested in learning. As part of one of my problems nowadays, I have an accounts on different sites that do training, and I go through, okay, what do I want to learn today? Oh man, that's cool. Oh man, that's even better. Oh, you get like 10 to 12 things that you want to learn about, and you realize you don't have all that time to learn all that stuff. I do it when I go through my Audible account and I listen to books. I see a whole bunch of stuff I want to learn. You just don't have the time. So I think a hacker is also somebody who enjoys learning, enjoys just the process of gaining knowledge.
Yeah. No, that's a really great point, Toby, and I don't think I've ever looked at it that way. It's, part of hacking is that quest for new knowledge and just really like getting a kick out of that. And it doesn't have to be technology either, right?
Nope.
Like, I was really big in the kung fu movies, and I look at the directors and actors and the whole history behind the, that genre of cinema. You and I have had similar conversations about the mafia, right?
And Darth Vader right before we came on.
And Darth Vader, right? And Star Wars. I was telling my wife about Wilro Hood, right? The guy that runs around as an extra in Empire Strikes Back with the Hamilton Beach ice cream maker. She's like, how do you know this? I'm like, I don't know. I was curious, and it seemed to be a thing, so...
And it's taken everything I have not to turn this from a technology thing into let's talk about Anakin and Darth, because again,
Yes. We get down rabbit holes. We do.
It is just, it's one of those things. Once you become and you nailed it. Once you become a hacker, it's not just technology. I one of my favorite things to read about nowadays is the brain. And guess what? How to learn.
Right.
There's an article that Business Insider has out. I haven't read it yet. I'm going to probably do it sometime by this weekend. They're saying they have a hack that can help you learn quicker. And, if I can find it and if I can use it, definitely going to use it.
You have to send me that. Now I'm curious. I want to read that same article.
Yeah, I got to make sure I have access to it. Business Insider likes to charge you for it, but
yeah.
If I got to pay $4 to get access for a month, I'll read it, cancel it, move on.
And it was interesting. Speaking of hackers getting kind of enthralled about different topics, it was pretty early on in DEF CON 2002, 2003 when you presented at DEF CON. And
Correct.
That was not on OS fingerprinting or any of the nerdy packet stuff that you had learned. It was do what the FBI does to find serial killers, to find hackers, evil hackers, I should say. Is that true?
Yeah, actually, my ex-wife was really deep into that stuff back in the day, and I used to listen to her all the time. And then I started thinking, I wonder if we can do the same thing. I wonder if there's characteristics that the so-called bad guy at the time has that we could classify, and just by looking at their footprints or fingerprints, whatever you want to call it, figure out what their intention was, or I know based off sometimes, especially now, 25, 30 years later, we can sit there and go based off the hack, whether it was advanced, whether they probably. There's a lot we can do. We can look from now, but back in early 2000s, I mean, it was just the beginning, and there was a lot of questions, and me and the two or three other guys were just trying to find the answers and trying to put it in a system that would work.
I feel like 20 years ago or so, the threat actors were a person or a very small group of people that you could profile. And where we are today, I think there are still those same people, but they're like a smaller piece in the puzzle. Like they have very, I think, well-defined roles today, and to understand the true motivation of the hack, air quotes, is a lot more difficult now because it's so widespread and their organizations are much larger. You think that's true?
Oh, I agree 100%. I still think we could classify them.
Oh, absolutely.
I still think based off, if you have the time and the effort to go through their recon and just tear apart everything, you could probably, within reason, nail them relatively. I shouldn't say relatively quickly, but toward the end of the investigation, you could probably sit there and say, hey, based off the evidence, this is probably, whatever. But I think that they've come a long ways since we tried to do it in 2002, 2003.
Yeah. I feel like it's more highly specialized, and you're using different people in different groups in a criminal aspect for certain parts of the operation, or certain parts of that operation are like a whole set of criminal organizations like that they're the ones that do the recon. They're the ones that do the initial implantation. Then there's other groups that do exploit development, malware development, and it's very segmented into specialties, much like we have in security today.
That's also like the mafia.
It is. That's where I was going with that too. Right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the hits back in the day, mainly with the Banana Squads, they had a team that came in to kill,
yep.
And then they had a team that would come in to clean up, then they had a team that would come in to bury the bodies.
Yeah,
same thing.
Yep. Yeah, I was reading about the Gambino crime family, in how they did some of the hits. There would be drivers that drove the getaway car, but there'd be a separate car. That's where you put the weapons after you did the hit, and the weapons would go one way, the people would go another way. Like you said, another team that come in and clean up, another team to bribe the law enforcement, things like that.
Yep, very much so. And there's been some cleanup teams that left evidence which got people arrested and thrown in jail.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on both sides, right? On the cyber criminal side too, I think we have done a much better job of collecting evidence, much like we've used technology in traditional law enforcement.
I agree.
Back when I'm reading those stories, I'm like, there was no the cameras are everywhere now. And there was like no cameras back, 70s and 80s in New York, right? Very few,
no.
if any.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm sure they have found places where no cameras are.
Yeah.
I mean, where there's a will, there's a way.
Absolutely. You got into reverse engineering some malware, looking at malware over the years. Was that just like another curiosity, or did that stem from some particular incidents where you came across malware?
I just loved it. I told you my favorite thing was analysis. I wouldn't necessarily reverse engineer it from a software perspective. I'm not a developer. I don't play one on TV. However, what I did enjoy was just, obviously back at that time, we didn't have the virtual machines like we have now, where you could just load your favorite set of exploits. I don't know about you, but back in the day, I used to love Packet Storm. Go there, find some tools or find some exploits or tools or both that would interest me, download them. I had my own network at home, my own separate, and I just run them. And I would watch them, I would analyze them, and I would publish what I found. Mainly around the Linux environment, I published a couple papers on loadable kernel modules, LKMs.
Yep.
And I forgot what group. Some group wrote a program that helped you detect LKMs, which was interesting because guess what? About a couple months after that happened, the organization I was working for had a box that was compromised, and it actually had the Torn rootkit. And I actually went in there, looked at the traffic. There's Torn, found all the specific everything to it, and we were able to shut it down.
Yep. Yeah, I feel like identifying and fingerprinting the infrastructure was easier back then too, because they didn't really have to go through great lengths to hide. Was that around the same time that you got death threats from Russia?
About the same time, yeah.
Is that
especially around the LKM stuff?
Yeah.
Because at the time, I'm not saying that at the time it wasn't. It was, people knew about it, but when I wrote the paper on it, I don't know if you remember, but Security Focus back in the day was the bomb with all the mailing list.
It's huge.
And I used to, I'd write papers. I remember Lance Spitzner being on there and a few other people being on there. The founder of BugTrack, and obviously you didn't send anything in BugTrack unless it was a bug. But you throw your papers or your analysis out on there, and you want to talk about peer review.
Oh, it was brutal. It was brutal.
It was.
There was no filters.
No, they would call you stupid, a moron in a microsecond, and wouldn't think twice.
Yep. And so,
I wrote a paper. Forgot whether it was on Torn or LKMs, but I had somebody from Russia email me back and threaten to kill me, which was interesting.
That's kind of scary.
It was. I probably was. It probably took me a couple of days to kind of say, yeah, whatever. But
obviously, nothing ever came of that.
No, I mean, like I told you the other day, back then it was going to be hard to find me. Nowadays, I mean, you can look anybody up and find out their address if you know where to look.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy, even people that have like short Twitter handles and Instagram accounts. People are finding their addresses and sending them pizza, trying to extort the Twitter handle away from them and stuff like that.
Yeah, I quite honestly, I'm not huge on social media. Number one, I think it takes away time for me of what we talked about a few minutes ago, hacking, learning. When I do go on social media and Twitter and Instagram, it's really for learning. I follow certain people, for information, but to good luck trying to come after me through social media.
Yeah, I agree. I like to make the trade-off on social media time to just reading about random stuff, whether that's security related or not, right?
Yeah, same here.
Did you go to a lot of other conferences other than DEF CON over the years? Do you have like a favorite conference or?
I used to love to go to SANS conferences.
Yeah, me too. New Orleans,
Man, not only really conferences. I mean, DEF CON was a big party too, but SANS had its own. SANS had its own parties as well.
Absolutely.
Although I remember in DEF CON, I remember in DEF CON some guy ODing right by the pool. Medics coming in.
Ugh.
So I mean that was interesting. At SANS, I just remember drinking a lot and then going out on in the quarter.
Yeah, because SANS used to have a lot of conferences in New Orleans. Speaking of that, you're gonna go learn about security, but might as well have a good time while we're doing it, kind of thing. It was certainly the city to go have a good time, similar to Vegas, but different, right?
Yeah, I went to a couple conferences in Vegas too that were fun. I have to say though, I kind of enjoyed New Orleans better than Vegas.
Yeah.
Just because I'm not a big gambler.
I went to a few in New Orleans for SANS, and it was good. I mean, you learned a lot. Did you take the class? You obviously took the classes too, right? SANS certification.
I did.
Yeah,
I did. But I'm trying to remember if I didn't get certified through the courses. I enjoyed going there. I love talking to the people and doing that stuff. But I most of my knowledge was hands on, not really through school or schooling.
I was going to say, Toby, you've made the transition. Well, I guess talk a little bit more about your career, right? I don't know where we ended off in your career path, right? You were still working some technical roles in your career. You spent a good number of time at Computer Sciences Corporation too, right?
I did. I was actually at CSC. Shortly after I got SAN certified. I was with them either as a contractor or as an employee from I think it was 2000 until 2013.
Mm-hmm.
I actually did vulnerability / pen test with them overseas at some of the embassies in Moscow and Budapest, which was kind of cool. And from there, I supported many different big corporations. I got out of security a couple of years to do service delivery. Didn't like it. They say you shouldn't be afraid to take a risk. I took a risk and figured out I didn't like it, came back, and don't plan on leaving. And then CSC, I left CSC. I supported the city of Chicago from a security perspective. From there, I was a CISO of a medium-sized company that does debt collection. From there, I went to WePro. And from there, I'm with the Swim Group, and I'm a virtual CISO supporting a company called Best Foot Forward.
Yeah, that's interesting. What was it like making that transition from more technical roles into the CISO role?
It's tough sometimes, and it's tough only from the standpoint of when you're presenting. Depending who you present, like if you and I talk, sometimes we can get into ones and zeros, and you understand what I'm saying, and I understand what you're saying. And when you're talking to a CEO or a CFO or any other C-level, they look at you. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's the phrase you don't want to hear back, right? When you're in that position.
Although to be honest with you, I've also had where you're presenting never at not at necessarily at the CEO level, but you're presenting at the CIO level, and you're thinking, okay, the CIO doesn't want to hear details, so
Mm-hmm.
you keep it high level, and you get there, and then they do a deep dive.
Right.
So it's again, like as they always say, you got to know your audience, really.
Mm. What was it like doing security for the city of Chicago? Was that infrastructure, I'm assuming? You had some reporting.
Yeah, a lot of infrastructure.
Yeah.
It was fun. I had a good time. The CISO for the city was a good guy. The people I worked with was great. I have no complaints.
I find that universities and municipalities can be difficult for security. Some of the most difficult environments because of the lack of budget and that lack of not so much in university, but it's different model in terms of capitalism, right? They're not protecting a product that they're selling; they're providing a service to the community, essentially.
Yes and no. I mean, there are some cities that have to remain HIPAA certified or HIPAA compliant.
Mm-hmm.
They have people's health information. I know the city of Chicago had to maintain HIPAA compliance. So I mean, whether it's New York, Chicago, LA, a lot of them have to get PCI certified. Think about it. Somebody gets a parking ticket or any kind of fine,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to call City Hall. City Hall is going to want to take credit cards. So, you have to be PCI compliant. So there is a little bit of a challenge, but when the city starts taking payment cards and starts dealing with people's healthcare information, there you got two standards that you have to comply with: HIPAA and PCI.
Is compliance security? What's the relationship? We love that question here on the show.
Nah, compliance isn't security. Compliance can help you in security. I'm not gonna. I think anybody in security that would sit there and say it won't help you, but to me, compliance is just bare minimum of what you should be doing in security. There's a lot that compliance doesn't cover. So, is it a great? I hate to call it a tool, but for lack of a better term, it's a great tool to use to help you and help guide your security of sense. But me personally, I'd rather use like the NIST CSF versus PCI. I mean, however, if you use the NIST CSF, combine it a little bit with ISO, mixed in a little PCI and maybe HIPAA, you combine all those 4 or 5 and you may have something good. And also, you got to include the CSA, the Cloud Security
Alliance, yeah,
whatever they are. You have to include those guys in there too, because now you have cloud. So, no, compliance is not security. It's
get you down the path, started down the path, right?
There you go. That's true. And if nothing else, if you don't have policies, compliance will at least get you thinking, okay, I got to have these policies and they got to cover A through Z. So bare minimum standards.
Do the compliance standards help us with that, like what we call security basics and security hygiene? And we hear that a lot, Toby, and I'm sure you hear it too, right? As everyone's like, well, you got to have a minimum baseline of security and do basic security stuff and basic security hygiene. Like what is that?
Well, you'd be surprised. I'm saying that. I know you're not surprised, but with some of the assessors I talked to from PCI and High Trust and others, you'd be surprised how many. I actually talked to a guy the past year who was an assessor who told me some company was trying to get certified, and they argued that they didn't need AV on their desktops. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that AV is the end all, but do you really want, your desktops, laptops, or whatever to be without some form, whether it's CrowdStrike, or whatever to provide minimum protection, and you still have companies arguing that's not needed? I mean, to me, that's why we have minimum standards, is to get people to do the bare minimum in order to try to protect, the information that they have.
I think that speaks to getting rid of the known bad as best you can.
Okay, yeah.
Right. I mean, even if you have Microsoft Defender on, that essentially comes with, although it depends on your licensing and all that stuff, it gets rid of a lot of the known bad in that realm.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Microsoft Defender, but if you can't afford something else, then you got to go with what you got to go with. It's better than nothing.
Yeah, I think that's where basic hygiene comes in, right? It's like what's better than nothing. And I think I like what you said, Toby, about you're not following just one compliance standard or one framework. You're kind of borrowing from multiple. I've always liked that strategy.
Yeah, and you hear people, I want to define this, or I want to define that. The older I get, the more experience I get. I don't want to define anything. I don't want to rework nothing. I did all that stuff back in the early 2000s. I want to be able to go to NIST, whether it's 853, whether it's the CSF, Risk Management Framework, whatever, or I want to go to ISO, or I want to go to PCI, or I want to go to wherever to get information. I don't want to have to recreate the wheel. Time is short, and I don't have enough time to recreate stuff. So, the more options I have as far as getting standards in order to help, the better.
Yeah, like other people have thought about this before, and everyone maybe is a unique snowflake, but we can still draw on the past and apply it to what's current.
Well, think about this. The guys at NIST get paid to come up with this stuff. I mean, right. They're probably in a conference room 5 days a week, every week, okay, what is the best way to secure this? Or what kind of policies do we need to do this? They get paid to do that. And they're getting paid to research. They're getting paid to come up with the best practices. So if they're getting paid to do it, and the industry has reviewed it and has come back and peer reviewed it, why not take it?
Toby, I wanted to ask you mentioned you were a pen tester for a little while. How long were you a pen tester, and what kind of stuff were you doing?
I wasn't a pen tester very long. I went on one trip to Moscow and Budapest and did a few pen tests. I wouldn't call myself a pen tester. I was a SOC analyst, for the most part. I could excuse me, I could run tools. I knew how to run them. I knew what they did. I knew what the outcome was going to be. I could have, I wanted to, but I never really got into pen testing. Where I was at the time, they said you have a choice. You can go to Israel and Egypt, or you can go to Moscow and Budapest. So I picked Moscow and Budapest. I think it was Tel Aviv, to be exact, in Israel. And I was like, nah. I had my youngest daughter wasn't born yet. She was going to be about 8 months. My ex-wife was going to be 8 months pregnant. So I was like, I'm not going. I don't want to go to the Middle East right now at this point in time. Been there, done that, got the T-shirt, and I actually went again, but it was just a couple of years ago. So I went to Moscow, Budapest, did that, and really haven't done a lot of pen testing since. If I needed to, could I do it? Yes. Am I going to sit here on this podcast and tell you that I'm great at it? No.
It's an interesting relationship between pen testing and vulnerability management, right? And I think some of what could come out of some pen tests are make sure you patch your stuff. As a CISO, Toby, what are your thoughts on vulnerability management? How do we do it today?
I think it depends on the size of your environment and how a company does it. But I think I found an interesting stat or piece of information a couple months ago, within the past couple months. A lot of people, like right now, they're the Java vulnerability, the log vulnerability that just came out last week. Everybody's high on that, and rightfully so. But typically, the vulnerabilities that you have to worry about the most are the ones that people forgot to patch 2 or 3 years ago. and for some reason they've dropped out of the risk register, or they've accepted the exception, accepted the risk, and just forgot about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when your organized crime or your bad guy, whatever you want to call them, threat actors come in and start marching throughout your environment because you decided to ignore something. And that gets back to what you're saying about patching. I mean, we, as an organization, whether you're big or small, to me, patching is, if it's not the most important thing that you do, it's one of the top 5.
Yeah, agreed. And I think attackers go after older vulnerabilities for a number of reasons. I think with me, if I put my pen tester hat on, I'm like, if you've got a 3-year-old vulnerability, like you said, that either means you accepted the risk or you're just not paying attention to that system. Therefore,
or
you forgot about it. In all those cases, it's something I'm interested in as an attacker.
Yep. And most likely, you're not going to monitor it as much.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, everybody is all looking for the Java log vulnerability. They're trying to get signatures. I got an email this morning from Palo Alto. Hey, we've got your back on this. You don't have to worry about somebody trying to do this. We'll protect you. But nobody's doing that about the vulnerability that came out 3 years ago or 2 years ago.
Right. And
they've forgotten all that. So while you can almost look at this like Java log file thing as a red herring, while the bad guys go after something that was released 2 years ago that didn't get the same amount of press.
Yep, but has the same results. Because for an attacker, it's about getting those results. It doesn't matter really how you get there, as long as you get the results.
Yep, and if they're coming for healthcare information or credit card information, they'll get it whether they get it through Java, whether they get it through whatever open door they find.
Right, and usually an exploit that's been hanging around for a couple of years is a little more tried and true and tested and works better than the newer exploits.
That's true. I mean, think about it. Some of the exploits that have been around for years, you don't even have to go to the dark web to get an exploit. You can go to somewhere like Packet Storm.
GitHub. I love GitHub.
Or GitHub, exactly, yeah. and find something that would get the job done.
Mm-hmm. And
you don't have to pay for it.
Right. Yeah, it's out there.
Exactly. And I think as you and I talked about the other day, it's kind of like using Office 365, or just Word, Excel, PowerPoint. They've been updated over the years. They've been, those packages have been redefined. They have been updated. They've gotten better. Exploits are the same thing. If you read what's going on nowadays, actually, the bad guys, in some ways, have a better service offering when it comes to exploits and getting the. How can I say this? Getting the. Yeah, I mean, they in some ways they run better services than the legitimate companies.
Mm.
Better customer service.
Right. Yeah. What's your thoughts on the 0-day exploit market? It sounds like that's something we don't really need to focus on, given that they're mostly exploiting older stuff. But
I disagree with that too. But I think it all, like everything in life, if everything's an emergency, nothing's an emergency.
Yeah.
I think it's a priority. I think you got to sit, look at, get with your team, and your team is not just security people. It's business people. It's IT people. It's security people. It's a combination of many different people, and you have to prioritize. You have to prioritize what you want to patch. And to be honest with you, if you got controls in place you don't want to patch, that's fine. But you got to make sure you don't drop that ball, or else it's going to become one of those 2-year-old vulnerabilities that maybe the controls get, that somebody takes away the controls, and then all of a sudden you got a gap.
Yeah, it's a great point, Toby. I think a lot of people talk about compensating controls, but they don't talk about monitoring those compensating controls and making sure they don't go away. How many times have you and I and many of us listening, you put something in the configuration that mitigates a vulnerability, then someone else, maybe you or someone else, does an update to that same system, and your control goes out the window because the config got overwritten, or that default state got overwritten, or that default password got put back if you're updating firmware, right? There's tons of scenarios.
And the one thing IT people and security people in particular don't do well is document.
Mm-hmm.
And document, and we still, in many ways, many organizations are still using Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, whatever, the Office suite to document things, and that's not effective because that's going to be gone. Somebody's going to delete it, forget it. I mean, you need a system. Excuse me, like a Qualys or something. If we're talking about vulnerability, where you can go in there and document, put the document, the exception, the justification, maybe a link to where it's stored. That way, it's always there when you're going through your monthly, or however, quarterly review of vulnerabilities. We got this vulnerability from last year. Why is it still vulnerability? Well, here's the exception number. Here's what we did, and here's where we can find more information. Do we want to address it, or do we want to leave it alone and extend it for another 6 months?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you need, and I love that, Toby, because you need those systems beyond the spreadsheet in other static forms that they don't provide the collaboration and communication that you get when you're using a system like Qualys or something similar, right? That can do that, like, hey, this hasn't been updated. Hey, this was updated, so notify those people. I think we get stuck on the quick, easy fixes we can do with a spreadsheet, but lose sight of the benefits we get from having a system that can help us track those things.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Excel and Word and all those applications have their place, but unfortunately, a lot of times with those applications, Toby leaves an organization and all those documents he came up with, they're all forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows where they're put. So the exceptions that he put together, nobody knows where they're at. So they're just like, we'll deal with it later, and it never gets dealt with. And then they're compromised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it kind of segues into asset tracking too, knowing what you have and what state it's in, and that certainly has burned so many of us over the years. And now we just have more assets that are more dynamic. And how do you track them and keep track of the state? Certainly, spreadsheet's not the place to do that.
No, we have a CMDB. Actually, I'm going to give a plug. There's a nice little, and they have a bigger piece of software, but we use I've used in the past a ITSM system called Fresh Service.
Mm-hmm.
And the CMDB is nice. You can tie your licenses into it.
Mm-hmm.
You can you can add your cloud service, your software as a service, your desktop, your laptop, your mobile phone. You can do just about anything you want with it, and it will help you track it. And if you're dealing with a lot of mobile people with laptops, they'll also put an agent on there. And the agent's so daggone small, you don't even know it's there. And the user can't even delete it. I mean, I've had it on my laptop before and actually gone look for it. And it's hard to find. So it's a nice little, if you're a small company and you need something that's affordable, it gives you the full ITSM suite of tools to use, including inventory, which is what we're talking about.
Which I think is important for this week, especially with Log4j and knowing what you have to go find the stuff. If you can cut that time down, then you're not as distracted.
That's right. Being able to log in and say, hey, I have services in AWS or Azure, and go find out if they're. And by the way, just since we're talking about that, CERT yesterday, Carnegie Mellon posted a link to all the main vendors and whether they're vulnerable to this or not, which is very helpful. So I don't know if you've seen it. If you're interested, I can send it to you. We can add it to anything related to this podcast.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, and I've seen similar lists, right? And I don't know that all of them are necessarily complete, though I don't think I've seen the one you're talking about. So
Now this is done by the certain. Again, there are products out there that CERT's not going to cover, so you're going to have to do your own homework. But it's a good first start.
Yep. Yeah. Some of the open source stuff doesn't seem to make some of those lists, and some of that open source stuff is pretty heavily used.
That's true. This isn't open source. This is like Cisco, Microsoft, Amazon, Broadcom, and a few others I forgot. But if you add it to all the other lists out there, you can come up with a comprehensive one.
Similar compliance standards, you gotta get multiple ones to get the right coverage.
That's true. Agreed.
Toby, you said you weren't really big on hacker movies and TV shows. You're not impressed.
No, not really.
Is that because of the way the hacking is presented in terms of the tech, right?
Yeah, my ex-wife used to love. My ex used to love Law and Order. I think she still does. And I used to sit down and watch it with her, and I would watch them, go through their firewall thing and this and that. I don't remember what exactly they said, and I'd be sitting there going, "Oh my God!" Went to the Harrison Ford movie, A Firewall, years ago. Wasn't impressed. So I know they try. It's kind of like, if you're a police officer and you're watching Lethal Weapon, which, by the way, I watched last night for the 1,000th time. It's a good movie, but it's not realistic. I mean, I'm watching Mel Gibson run with a machine gun shooting a guy in the middle of a street, busy highway.
Right.
In today's society, he would have been shot.
Yep.
And if he's a cop, he would have been prosecuted in about 2 minutes after that gunfire was done. So I mean, again, it's unrealistic, and the only unrealistic thing I like is Star Wars, Harry Potter. I like some of Lords of the Rings stuff, but
Oh, and that's how we got. But that's how we got on this topic, because I was listening to the Our Thing podcast with Sammy the Bull Gravano. No, but it wasn't that. It was an interview on Jordan Harbinger with Sammy the Bull, and he was talking about mob movies and TV shows, and he said, I watched Sopranos, and some of the other folks have watched Sopranos, and it's about 85% Hollywood and 15% fact. And that's kind of like the way I think you view the hacking in TV shows, that, in the hacking that's portrayed in movies and TV shows is in the same light.
Agreed, 100%. And I just
now what did come out in his, I think it was his podcast, that The Godfather was probably flipped around the other way. Like, The Godfather was a more real portrayal of the way the mafia worked.
That's what I heard too. I never heard a percentage, but I did hear it was more accurate than normal.
Yeah, there was some mob ties in there to the producers and directors too. I think he got into on his podcast. Which some of the hacker movies have had some good advice. Mr. Robot had some really good advisors to the show. I'm sure,
and like any movie, you can't, or TV show, you can't include everything. I mean,
yeah,
at some point in time, you got to cut your ties and run.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Well, I know you're a big mafia history person. What are some of your favorite works on that? I'm curious. After listening to
movies.
Yeah, movies, documentaries, books. What's some of your favorites?
So there is a Five Families book.
Mm-hmm.
You can get it on Audible, relatively cheap. It's about 35 hours long if you're going to listen to it, but it goes back to the start of the Five Families. I liked the book on the Chin.
Yeah.
I like what he did. So I liked it.
He was the mafia guy, though, that you couldn't say his name. When you referenced him, you had to touch your chin, and that's, I think, how he got the nickname.
Yeah, but he also walked around in his robe, acting like he was crazy, and he wasn't. Mm-hmm. Then the Bonanno boss, Joey, I forgot his name.
Yeah,
he went to jail, but he got lucky, because when he got out of jail to take over the Bonannos were still, were the redheaded stepchild. because of Donnie Brasco, and
Yes.
he wouldn't let his made men talk about him either. I either they pointed to the cheek or to the nose.
Gotcha.
I forgot, but they pointed to something else whenever they would talk to him or talk about him. They could never say anything about him in public.
I feel like there's some parallels there. The beginning of organized crime, I think, stemmed from a lot of the gangs of New York, which was also a movie, right? Where the immigrants were coming over to New York in the 20s and 30s and creating these street gangs. And there was no rules, there was no structure. You would just form gangs and do some pretty heinous things. And it was Lucky Luciano that said, we need to be more organized. We need to have 5 families. We need to have rules, and we need to make this more about a business. I feel like it's pretty similar to cyber criminals, right? You had individuals committing cyber crimes back in the day, but now it's kind of more organized.
I would say, I would, if you listen to Sammy the Bull or Gotti the son, Junior. They're probably better businessmen than some businessmen are because they understand organizational structure. They understand a chain of command. They understand the value of a dollar. In many cases, how to make it. Same thing with the cyber criminals. I mean, they know how to make it. They probably have a chain of command no different than a CSC, although they're not in business anymore. They're DXC or any other company for that matter. I'd say it's probably right. And it wouldn't surprise me if the traditional mob is into that stuff either.
Yeah. I haven't tracked what the mob is today. I think it's a burning question in a lot of people's minds because it's such...
Oh, it's out there. There's a website called, I think, Gangland News or something like that, that you could go out. It's like $50 a year, and it will keep you up to date with the latest and what the current mafia is doing.
It's amazing
with Rico, they're not doing much.
That's what we talked about a little bit about Rico earlier, right? Is Rico's been used not just it was created pretty much to take down the mob because they basically ran everything, and law enforcement was having a tough time. And with the Rico statutes, they were actually able to prosecute based on racketeering. So you didn't have to actually do the stealing or the murdering. If you were involved from an organizational standpoint, they could prosecute you. Did I capture that correctly?
You don't even have to authorize it. The fact that you were the Don or
the boss, the underboss,
you were the boss or the underboss, and somebody went and hijacked a armed robbery in a bank, you're going to jail.
And they've used that to prosecute cyber criminals in other types of criminal activity outside of the mafia.
Yeah, they do that all the time. I mean, I think I don't know this for a fact, but if they did it with the mob, then I'm sure if they've done it with cartels, because otherwise you would never be able to go after the top dog because technically speaking, their hands are clean. They don't get dirty.
Well, awesome.
So I mean,
well, Toby, it was great chatting with you. Are you doing any like presenting, going to conferences, anything like that?
Since COVID started, I haven't gone anywhere.
Yeah.
But not right now. I'm trying to get back. I'm trying to get back on the writing track. I enjoy writing, as I think I told you the other day. I'm starting to approach writing it differently than I did before, which was, hey, I got to find a topic. Now I'm kind of looking at it as what question do I want to have answered?
You're looking at a book. You think you're gonna go back writing some
right now? Start with papers. I wrote something about a year ago. I put on Medium. I don't know if you've ever heard of Medium.
Yeah. We reference it all the time. There's some good stuff out on Medium.
I put something up about the NIST CSF. But that was, to me, that was forced by me. And instead, I want to, for lack of a better way of explaining this, ask the right questions so I can come up with the right answers and then, write the right answers.
Well, make sure you keep us in the loop, Toby. I'm anxious to see what you come up with, especially based on all of your experiences, much of which we talked about today. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Toby.
Thank you.